The day Renata Cross walked into Decker's shop with 3 men in suits behind her, everybody on Millbrook Avenue stopped what they were doing. That was how people remembered it later. The guy at the tire shop 2 doors down said he saw her come out of the black SUV first, heels clicking on the wet asphalt like she already owned the place. The woman from the dry cleaner across the street said she watched the whole thing through the window and felt sick to her stomach before a single word was even spoken. But Decker Holt didn't see any of that. He was under a 1987 Chevy C10 when they came in, listening to the radio, humming something he couldn't have named. His hands were black to the elbow. His 9-year-old son, Bobby, was sitting on an overturned bucket by the workbench, doing homework and eating a peanut butter sandwich. That was the last quiet afternoon they would have for a long time. Mr. Holt. The voice was calm, professional, the kind of calm that costs money to maintain. Decker rolled out from under the truck and squinted up at the light. Renata Cross was standing in the center of the garage in a charcoal blazer, holding a manila folder, flanked by 2 lawyers and a man from the city zoning office whose name Decker would later learn was Tidwell, Miss Cross. He stood up slowly and wiped his hands on a rag. "Didn't know you made house calls." She didn't smile. She never smiled at him, not once in the 3 years he had known her, or rather the 3 years he had existed in her peripheral vision. Renata Cross ran Apex Motor Group, a regional chain of 18 dealerships and a fleet services company that had quietly absorbed most of the independent repair shops in the county over the past decade. Decker's place, Holt Automotive, was one of the last holdouts. "I've come to finalize the matter of your lease," she said. "There's nothing to finalize. My lease runs through February." One of the lawyers, young, clean-shaved, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than Decker's monthly rent, stepped forward and placed a document on the hood of the Chevy. As of last Thursday, the lawyer said, the property at 441 Millbrook Avenue was acquired by Apex Property Holdings. The existing lease contains a standard change of ownership clause that allows the new owner to terminate with 30 days' notice. Decker looked at the document. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at Renata Cross. 30 days, he said. "You've had a fair run here, Decker," Renata said, and the way she used his first name, easy, almost bored, made the back of his neck go hot. "But this location is going into our portfolio. We're converting space. I've got a waiting list of customers. I've got jobs booked through spring. You'll want to refer them elsewhere." She tucked the folder under her arm. "There'll be a formal notice mailed to this address. I'd suggest you begin making arrangements." Then she looked at Bobby. Not for long. Just a glance, the kind you give a piece of furniture you're mildly surprised to find in a room. Then she turned and walked back out into the gray November afternoon, and the lawyers followed her, and Tidwell from zoning followed them, and the black SUV pulled away from the curb like nothing had happened. Bobby looked up from his homework. He was still holding the sandwich. "Dad," he said. "What did she want?" Decker stood in the middle of his garage and looked at the tools on the wall, his father's tools, half of them the old craftsman stuff that had hung in this same building since 1987, and he didn't answer right away. "Nothing to worry about," he finally said. He was lying, he knew it, and the worst part was that Bobby probably knew it too, because Bobby was sharp the way kids raised by single fathers tend to be sharp, tuned into the frequencies adults pretend don't exist. Decker Holt had been running Holt Automotive alone for 6 years since his wife, Carol, passed away from a brain aneurysm at 34. Before that, Carol had done the books, managed the appointments, handled every piece of paperwork Decker had spent his whole life trying to avoid. She was the organized one. She was the one who knew where things were. Decker was the one who could take an engine apart in the dark by feel and put it back together without losing a single bolt. When she died, he had no idea how to file a quarterly tax return. He had no idea how to apply for Bobby's reduced-price lunch at school. He burned dinner every night for 6 months and cried in the truck on the way home from the grocery store more times than he could count. He figured it out. That's what people said about Decker. He figured it out. He hired a part-time bookkeeper 2 mornings a week. He learned to cook 4 things well and rotated them. He coached Bobby's Little League team 2 springs in a row and always had a signed permission slip in before the deadline. The shop was what held him together. The shop smelled like oil and rubber and solvent and, in the back office, faintly of the cedar soap Carol used to keep in the drawer with the files. He couldn't have explained what Holt Automotive meant to him without embarrassing himself, so he didn't try, and now Renata Cross was taking it. He had 30 days. He called his attorney that same evening, a man named Frank Adler who had done the original lease review and who was honest to a fault about what he found when he read the change of ownership clause. "It's airtight," Frank said. "I'm sorry, Decker, I should have caught this 3 years ago. I didn't. Can we contest it? We can try. But they've got a firm with 40 people working this. You've got me and a paralegal named Josie, and the clause is real. It's right there on page 11. Decker sat at the kitchen table after Bobby was in bed and stared at his phone for a long time. The referral calls were the worst part. 26 customers over 2 weeks. He had been doing oil changes for the Pemberton family since their oldest daughter was in high school, and she now had 2 kids of her own. He had rebuilt the transmission in Doug and Elaine Rafter's Silverado 3 years running. He had a standing Wednesday appointment with a retired mail carrier named Walter Griggs who brought his F-150 in every week like it was a social call because it basically was. "Where am I supposed to go?" Walter asked on the phone, and Decker didn't have a good answer. The last day at Millbrook Avenue, he stayed until 11 at night taking down the tools. Bobby helped. They barely talked. When they carried the last toolbox out to the trailer Decker had borrowed from his cousin, Bobby sat on the back bumper of the truck and looked at the darkened bay doors. "We're gonna be okay," Bobby said. He said it like he was the one trying to convince Decker, not the other way around. Decker put his hand on his son's shoulder. He didn't trust himself to say anything back. For 3 weeks after the shop closed, Decker worked out of his driveway, extension cords. A borrowed lift he'd bought off a guy in Clarksburg for $400 cash. He did what he could. He turned away anything that needed real equipment. It was his neighbor, a retired machinist named Alton Riggs, who told him about the Fenwick building. "Old precision manufacturing plant," Alton said one Saturday morning, leaning on the fence between their yards with a cup of coffee. "Been empty 8-9 years, out on County Road 7, you know it?" Decker knew the building. He had driven past it 100 times. A long, low structure set back from the road behind a gravel lot. Brick walls gone rusty orange with age, a sagging section of roof over the east wing, windows boarded where they hadn't already been broken. It looked like the kind of place people dumped old appliances. Why would I want that? Because the guy who owns it is Gareth Voss, and Gareth Voss has been trying to unload it for years and can't because it's zoned light industrial and the footprint's too big for any normal buyer. I ran into him at the hardware store last month. He's about ready to give it away. Decker drove out to look at it that afternoon with Bobby in the passenger seat. They got out and walked the perimeter. The gravel lot was deep with weeds. One of the overhead doors was jammed open and a family of starlings had colonized the southeast corner. There was standing water in 2 places on the concrete floor. Bobby said, "It's big, too big," Decker said. But he was already thinking. The main floor was 12,000 square feet. The electrical infrastructure, though old, was intact. 3-phase power, the kind that ran serious equipment. The loading bays were solid. The floor drains worked. Whoever had built this place 60 years ago had built it right. Decker called Gareth Voss the next morning. The asking price was a number that made Decker laugh. The counteroffer he made was a number that made Gareth Voss go quiet for a long time. They settled somewhere in the middle, and even then the monthly payment was more than Decker had ever committed to in his life. He signed the papers anyway. He told nobody except his cousin Rudy, who helped him haul equipment, and Frank Adler, who reviewed the lease. "You're either going to pull this off or lose everything," Frank told him. "I know. You sure about this?" "No," Decker said, "but I'm doing it anyway." The first 6 months at the Fenwick building were the hardest thing Decker Holt had ever done, and he had spent 6 years doing hard things. He did every repair himself. He answered every call, scheduled every appointment, ordered every part. He power washed the floor on a Saturday and Bobby helped him paint the walls. He fixed the stuck overhead door over 2 weekends with parts from the salvage yard. He ran extension cords while he waited for an electrician he could afford, which took longer than he wanted. The starlings relocated to the rafters and stayed. Bobby named 3 of them. Decker brought in a part-time mechanic named Drew Sato in the spring, a quiet 28-year-old who had been let go from a dealership in Morgantown when the service department was downsized. Drew was methodical and fast and never complained about the state of the building. "I've worked in worse," Drew said on his first day. "How much worse?" Drew looked at the starling nest above Bay 4. "About this bad, actually." They both laughed, and something settled between them the way it does between men who know how to work and don't need everything to be perfect to get started. By summer, Decker had more work than he could handle. The customers who had followed him from Millbrook came, word spread. He had always been cheap by dealership standards and meticulous in a way that dealerships rarely were. He didn't charge for diagnostic time. He called before doing anything extra. He stood behind his work. What he hadn't expected was the fleet business. It started with a call from a landscaping company outside of Stonewall whose owner had been referred by Walter Griggs. They had 12 trucks and a reputation for burning through service shops. Decker took the account. He figured out the schedule. He built a system, drop-off nights, loaner transport, a maintenance calendar for each vehicle, and ran it quietly and precisely and never missed a deadline. The landscaping company told a plumbing contractor. The plumbing contractor told a home health agency with a 9-van fleet. Within 14 months of opening the Fenwick building, fleet contracts made up 40% of Decker's revenue. He hired 2 more mechanics. He fixed the roof over the east wing. He bought a Hunter alignment system he'd wanted for years and installed it on a Tuesday afternoon and stood looking at it for a moment before putting it to work. Bobby started middle school. He did his homework in the back office after school, same as he'd always done, eating peanut butter sandwiches on the same overturned bucket which Decker had brought from Millbrook for no practical reason whatsoever. What happened with the motor design was not something Decker had planned. It started in winter 2 years after the move to Fenwick. Fleet vehicles failing in predictable ways, the same worn bearings, the same degraded seals, in patterns Decker could see across vehicles and makes. He had been turning it over in his head for months, making notes in a composition book he kept on the workbench. The core problem was a thermal cycling issue in certain diesel engine configurations, the kind of engine used in work trucks across half the country. The manufacturer's solution was to replace parts on a schedule. Decker's solution was different. He had sketched out a modification, a simple, inexpensive retrofit to the oil delivery pathway that reduced thermal stress at the point of failure. It was elegant in the way that the best mechanical solutions are elegant. Obvious in retrospect, almost embarrassingly simple, and nobody had thought of it first because nobody had spent 20 years watching these particular engines fail from close enough to notice the pattern. He had a machinist friend in Elkins fabricate a prototype. He installed it on 6 fleet vehicles with the owner's permission and tracked the results over 8 months. The results were significant. Wear rates dropped by something he estimated at 30 to 40% at the failure point. Replacement intervals stretched considerably. For a fleet operator running 20 trucks, the savings over 5 years were real money. He wrote up a 1-page summary and showed it to Frank Adler, not because Frank knew anything about engines, but because Frank was the most careful reader Decker knew. "This is valuable," Frank said, reading it twice. "You understand that, right? This isn't a novelty, this is a commercial product." Decker understood it in the abstract. He filed a provisional patent application in March with Frank's help, spent 3 weeks gathering documentation, and sent it in with the filing fee he paid out of his personal account. He told no one else. Which was why he was surprised in April when a man named Clifford Mance showed up at the Fenwick building with a business card identifying him as a business development consultant with ties to Apex Motor Group. Clifford Mance was affable in the way of people trained to be affable. He shook hands. He looked at the shop and said something complimentary about the operation. He mentioned that Apex was expanding its fleet services division and had heard good things about Holt Automotive through the industry. "We'd love to explore a partnership," he said. "What kind of partnership?" Decker asked. Mance explained it over 20 minutes. Apex would offer Holt Automotive a preferred provider contract for its regional fleet, significant guaranteed volume long-term commitment. In exchange, Apex would want right of first refusal on any proprietary processes or technologies developed by Holt Automotive. Decker listened carefully. He was not a suspicious man by nature, but something in the framing of it, the casualness of the technology clause, the way Mance dropped it in at the end like an afterthought, made him go still inside. "I'd need to run this by my attorney," he said. "Of course," Mance said. "No rush at all." He left a proposal on the workbench. Decker waited until Mance's car was out of the lot, then called Frank Adler. Frank read the proposal that evening. He called back in 2 hours. "That technology clause," Frank said. "It's a rights grab, Decker. If you sign this and your patent goes through, Apex has a colorable claim to it. It's written vaguely enough that they could argue it covers exactly what you filed. How would they even know about the patent?" Silence on the line. "Patent applications are public record after 18 months, Frank said quietly. But a provisional is searchable in some databases immediately after filing if someone has the right access. And if someone at Apex has industry contacts who monitor those filings, Renata Cross," Decker said. He said it flat, not as a question. "I don't know that," Frank said. "But I'd be careful." Decker put the phone down. He sat in the office for a long time. Bobby was at his mother's sister's house for the weekend. The building was quiet. A starling shuffled somewhere up in the rafters. He did not sign the proposal. What happened next came in stages, and each stage was worse than the last. The city sent an inspector 3 weeks after the Mance visit. The inspector found 3 items requiring correction: a fire suppression issue in the storage area, a drainage calculation for the wash bay, and a ventilation measurement in Bay 2. None of them were serious violations. All of them required fees and reinspection. Decker corrected them. He paid the fees. A month later, a competing fleet customer, one that used a shop affiliated with Apex, began calling 3 of Decker's fleet accounts. The calls were professional. They offered pricing that was, by Decker's best estimate, below cost. 2 accounts took the meetings. One of those accounts was the landscaping company that had started everything. The owner of the company, a man named Doug Prentice, called Decker directly. "They're offering me a rate I can't match on paper," Doug said. He sounded genuinely uncomfortable. "I want you to know this isn't about your work. Your work is the best I've ever had. But I've got margins to think about." "I know," Decker said. "I appreciate you calling me personally." He hung up and stood at the window of the Fenwick building, looking out at the gravel lot, and let himself feel it. The anger, the helplessness, the particular kind of rage that comes from watching someone with more power than you use it carelessly. The way rich people use things they don't need. He let himself feel it for exactly 10 minutes. Then he went back to work. He did not lose the account. He drove out to see Doug Prentice the next morning, sat across from him at a picnic table outside the office trailer, and laid out a 5-year cost analysis vehicle by vehicle, accounting for actual wear patterns, parts costs, downtime, the kind of detailed fleet management Apex couldn't replicate at scale because it required knowing every truck personally. Doug studied it for a long time. "You're telling me the low price now costs more later?" "I'm showing you the math," Decker said. Doug kept the account. He signed a 3-year agreement 2 weeks later. The patent was granted the following February, 14 months after the provisional filing. Frank Adler called with the news at 7:30 in the morning, and Decker took the call in the truck in the school drop-off line with Bobby in the passenger seat. "You're the inventor of record," Frank said. "Sole applicant, utility patent, full rights." Decker thanked him and hung up. Bobby looked at him. "What was that?" "Good news. About the shop, about something I built." Bobby thought about this for a moment. "Is this the engine thing?" Decker glanced at him. "You know about the engine thing, Dad." Bobby looked at him with the faintly exhausted patience of a 12-year-old who has been paying closer attention than the adults assume. "I do my homework in your office. You leave your notebooks everywhere." Decker laughed. It came up from somewhere real, the way laughter does when you don't see it coming. "Yeah," he said. "It's the engine thing." "Good," Bobby said, and got out of the truck. The licensing agreement came through a manufacturer in Ohio that Drew Sato had heard about at an industry conference. A mid-sized maker of replacement parts for commercial diesel engines, family-owned, 30 years in business, with a distribution network that covered most of the country's fleet service market. They had seen Decker's patent in the database. They had contacted Frank independently. By the time Frank brought it to Decker, they had already run their own analysis of the thermal cycling data. The initial licensing deal was structured as a royalty arrangement, quarterly payments tied to units sold. The manufacturer's sales projections were conservative. Even at conservative numbers, Decker did the arithmetic twice and put the notepad down and went outside and stood in the gravel lot for a minute by himself. He could pay off the Fenwick building in 4 years. He could hire 2 more mechanics without touching the operating budget. He could take Bobby on a real vacation, the first one since Carol died, somewhere with a beach. Renata Cross made one more attempt. 3 weeks after the licensing agreement was signed, a new lawyer, not the clean-shaved one from Millbrook, someone older from a firm in Charleston, contacted Frank Adler claiming that the engine modification had been developed using proprietary diagnostic data belonging to Apex fleet vehicles that had been serviced at Holt Automotive, and that Apex had a potential intellectual property claim. Frank read the letter. He called Decker. He was almost amused. "They're arguing that servicing their vehicles gave you access to data that informed the design," Frank said. "Which technically it did, in the sense that you watched their engines fail the same way everything else fails. It's a stretch. It's a real stretch. Can they win with it? No, but they can make us spend money to prove it." Decker thought about it. "Let them file." "You sure?" "File the response. Show them the documentation. Everything I did was with customer permission, in my own shop on my own time with materials I paid for. Let them explain to a judge how watching a broken thing break means they own the fix." They filed. The counter response from Apex's lawyers came back 6 weeks later, notably shorter than the original letter, requesting a confidential settlement discussion. Frank advised Decker to decline. The matter was dropped in October. Bobby turned 13 the spring after. He had shot up 2 inches over the winter and now stood almost at Decker's shoulder, which was both a surprise and not a surprise at all. Decker had been watching it happen incrementally and still wasn't ready for it. They grilled burgers in the parking lot of the Fenwick building on Bobby's birthday, just the 2 of them and Drew's wife and Alton Riggs from next door. Decker had put a picnic table out there in June, and nobody had questioned why. It was the kind of thing you do when a place starts to feel like yours. Bobby had invited 2 friends from school. They sat at the end of the table playing something on their phones, and every so often one of them would look up and ask Decker something about the shop. In that way, 13-year-olds ask questions about adult things, half interested, half just practicing. "Is it true you invented something?" one of them asked. Yeah, Decker said. Like a real invention? Real enough. Cool, the kid said and went back to his phone. Alton laughed. Drew's wife said she thought that was the nicest thing anyone had said about a patent application she'd ever heard. Later, after the friends had been picked up and Drew and his wife had gone home, Decker and Bobby sat at the picnic table in the last of the light with the remains of the cake between them. A few of the starlings were working the lot for crumbs. Dad, Bobby said, do you ever think about Mom? Decker looked at the lot. All the time. I think she would have liked this place. She would have organized the office immediately, Decker said. There would have been labels on everything within a week. Bobby smiled. He had Carol's smile, the specific curve of it, the way it came slowly and then all at once. Yeah, he said. She would have. They sat there while the light went orange and then purple and then gone. The building was dark behind them, but the sign Decker had put up over the main bay was on, white lettering, good and plain, Holt automotive. Below it, smaller, EST 2019. It had been 5 years, it felt like 100, it felt like nothing at all. Down on County Road 7, a truck passed, headlights sweeping the gravel, and Decker watched it go and thought about everything Carol never got to see. Bobby's first middle school game, the Fenwick building on the day they got the roof fixed, the licensing agreement with its quiet life-changing numbers, the letter from Apex's lawyers that arrived and was defeated and was never mentioned again. He thought about how much of raising a kid is just refusing to be broken in front of them often enough that they start to believe you can't be broken, and how that's both a necessary lie and, eventually, almost true. Bobby picked up a fork and cut himself another piece of cake. Happy birthday, Decker said. Thanks, Dad. Bobby took a bite. So what's next? Decker looked at the sign. He thought about the east wing, the last section he hadn't renovated. He had an idea for it, a specialty bay for diesel work, the kind of thing that would serve the fleet market for the next decade if he set it up right. I've got some ideas, he said. Bobby nodded, not surprised. He had learned by now that his father always had some ideas, even when it looked like he had nothing, especially then, and that the ideas had a way of becoming things real and solid and standing, the kind of things you could put a sign on and show a kid when they were grown and say, that's what it looks like when someone refuses to quit.